We're here today to discuss how Pillar 2 impacts asset managers and M&A deals. Now, this is really important as the UK and other countries start to implement the Pillar 2 global minimum tax regime. So I'm delighted to be joined by Elaine and James from our Deal Advisory Tax Group. So Elaine, let's start with you. What are the key circumstances in which Pillar 2 can apply to private equity groups and their deals?
It's a really interesting question. You know, the private equity industry encompasses such a myriad of participants and sizes of houses and location of assets and location of management assets. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. The way I approach it is looking at it from sort of 4 elements, which I'll quickly run through. The first is, as the asset manager itself, are you within Pillar 2? Never forget to test that one. The second one is, do you just have a portfolio group which is within Pillar 2, and how is that going to impact what you want to do and how you want to interact with that portfolio group? And then the million-dollar question for some people at the moment is, to what extent do you have to consolidate your various portfolio groups when assessing whether you hit the 3,750 threshold? And if you don't have to consolidate, why don't you have to consolidate? Make sure that you have that evidence and information close to hand. And then moving on to a topic which I'm sure James will have quite a lot to say about, is, do you need to put in place procedures and approaches to acquisitions, bolt-ons and disposals so you can monitor and work out how you're going to interact with your deal teams when it comes to Pillar 2 and the impact on M&A.
It's really interesting. And in terms of some of the work that we're doing with our clients in the PE space, what are some of the pitfalls and complexities that we're starting to see?
Well, as I say, not so much pitfalls. I'd like to think there were challenges and complexities, but you know, we have to remember that not all private equity houses are at exactly the same point in the journey when they're assessing the impact of Pillar 2 on them and their portfolios. If you don't think as a house that either yourself or your portfolio is going to be impacted by Pillar 2, you're still going to have to articulate that clearly and the reasons behind that to both your stakeholders and third parties. So it's important that you consider that now. And then don't make assumptions, because say for instance you have a portfolio that is more or less exclusively in the UK. That doesn't mean that you can just ignore Pillar 2 and its potential impact. And then when you think about clients who are obviously going to be impacted by Pillar 2, a couple of things that I've been talking to those clients about: if and to what extent you want to work out with your portfolios how to have a consistent approach to the interpretation of Pillar 2 on a global basis, you know, that sit in a myriad of jurisdictions. That's a really interesting discussion and a difficult one to work out what the best approach is. And then thinking about moving forward, yes, the transitional rules are helpful, but from a house perspective, how are you going to support your portfolio companies deal with the complexities of reporting and what are undeniable difficult data challenges as Pillar 2 develops?
So James, turning to the large corporate market, what are we seeing as some of the key challenges and considerations when it comes to deals?
So it won't surprise you, a lot of the things that Elaine was talking about as relevant for private equity equally apply to corporates. But there are a few specific nuances here that I'll go through. I mean, the first is acquisitions and the acquisition model itself. Lots of groups have their tried and tested ways of acquiring targets in the M&A space. Is that playbook still fit for purpose? And it's really important because that can drive the value and can drive what the offer price can be. So testing that is kind of job one, I'd say, for lots of our larger clients. The second area is the diligence itself. Now, you may say the rules aren't enforced yet, diligence should be looking at historical impact, but Pillar 2 kind of blows that out of the water. Our largest clients are now looking much more prospectively about the impact of the transaction on their own group. So a key example for it would be for those groups that are beneath the 750 million threshold and aren't subject to the Pillar 2 rules, if the acquisition tips them over and makes them subject to the GloBE rules. Now, that's fundamental for the tax profile of the group and is something which is a key shift in the way that we tackle due diligence processes now, because it's a more holistic, forward-looking, integrated approach. I think the third aspect to cover is the transaction documentation itself. There's a huge amount of complexity on where does the Pillar 2 charge sit? Is it UPE level, ultimate parent entity level, or is it in the jurisdiction itself? And with transactions, who pays the tax? How is it funded? And actually, if there's any disputes around Pillar 2, how do you exchange information between buyer and vendor to make that work in a seamless and collaborative way, in a way that we've never really had to think about before with transactions. And the final point is synergies and integration. Is the impact of bringing the groups together, is that going to be subject to Pillar 2 itself? And actually, do you need to make your synergy case work harder to overcome the challenges that Pillar 2 has posed? And this is to go alongside all of the compliance reporting systems, data compliance issues that have been spoken about before.
Gosh, it really is a brave new world, I think, when it comes to the impact of Pillar 2 on deals. So just to both of you, really, I mean, if you're a deals tax professional, either in a corporate or in PE, when you think about your live deals, your pipeline, and also your future approach, right, what are the key things you should be thinking about and doing now?
We've touched on it a couple of times, but stakeholder management is key. And heads of tax have been having this sort of debate with CFOs for a while, but I think putting it into the deal context, this discussion now needs to head out to the wider corporate development teams and ensuring that the impact of Pillar 2 is thought through on acquisition models and on the pipeline of saying how competitive can we be in the market given the impact of these provisions. And I think on the back end of the deal, it's then making sure that M&A tax teams are plugged into their compliance and reporting teams to make sure that where you make an acquisition, that they are appropriately plugged into the systems and controls that they will already be working upon.
Yeah, and going back to something that James said, I think trying to socialise what are incredibly complex rules to non-tax professionals, particularly within a private equity context, is going to be key, because it's important that the investment professionals understand how this could impact their sales process, but also work out how they want to model for Pillar 2 going forward when they're buying assets, and to what extent it really is going to impact any of their decision making.
So there's a lot to think about, I think, in terms of being outside of the heat of a deal and making sure that it's well understood what the issues are going to be for your particular platform. So thanks very much for your insights. That was really valuable. Thank you.